Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Queenvest Longevity Masterclass. Today, we will be speaking about a very interesting and very important topic, which is the retirement. And the twist here is the twist here is how we're going to speak about retirement and how different this conversation is from probably any conversation that you have previously heard. I'm very excited to have with us Brian Briggs, who comes to us from Hartford Funds. And what I'd like to mention is how impressed I am by the work that Hartford Funds has done in the area of longevity and retirement planning. I first came across their work when I started researching longevity, and I had come across a white paper written by Dr. Joe Coughlin, who is the director of the MIT Age Lab. And I was fascinated by what I read about and the impact that this work has will have on all of us. And when I came across the exceptional material and resources that Hartford Funds had, I had to reach out. So it is my pleasure to bring to you guys today Brian Briggs. And I'll briefly introduce him before we get going. And I'm excited to have this conversation and ask a few questions. So Brian Briggs is the Managing Director of Applied Insights for Hartford Funds. Brian engages and educates financial professionals and their clients about emerging opportunities in financial services. These opportunities range from tactical strategies in areas such as retirement, income, and legacy planning to anticipating and preparing for long term demographic and lifestyle changes. In July 2019, Brian joined the organization as a senior content creation consultant responsible for creating engaging product marketing content for a wide audience. Brian is also an active member of the Hartford Funds Diversity Council. Originally from Asheville, North Carolina, Brian attended Catawba College and is currently pursuing an MBA in Leadership and Development at University of North Carolina's Cannon Flagler Business School. So, Brian, welcome to the Queenvest Longevity Masterclass. Very happy to have you.
Yeah,
Um,
excited to be here, Ruzanna. This is gonna be awesome.
yes. So, what when I read that you were a part of the team or created the content, I thought I will just jump right there because it's the work that you guys have done is amazing, and we will have resources, and I'd like everybody to look at what you have and learn as much as they can. But how, I guess my first question is, how did you come across um, this? How did you get started in this area? Um,
Yeah, longevity is a very broad topic. University of Georgia did a study a couple of years ago and said like the person who lived to 150 years old is already born. So you read that and it stands out to you, and it kind of puts on a new wrinkle in the whole longevity discussion. But our relationship with the MIT Age Lab, I mean, it goes back close to 20 years. We're one of the founders of the MIT Age Lab. We believe in this. When you think about the quantitative discussion you as financial professionals have day in and day out, you are preparing for longevity. Mostly on the quant side, there's planning, right? There's a broad discussion to be had. But when you think about longevity at the core, what clients do on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock, right? That's the longevity discussion that we tend to have, right? So it's about kind of living a quality of life, not just once you reach retirement, but well into retirement.
mhm. And yes, it's very interesting because I think we'll go through some of it. But what was interesting to me was it's a really new and unexplored phase in human history, right? So we are all kind of figuring it out as we go. I had somebody in the master class for a different session as she was talking about how she has changed her life and how it's always searching, always exploring something. And another thing that struck me is the fact that we're looking at 8,000 days of retirement, right? So it's
Yeah, small plug there. Yeah,
um, yeah, and I think that is the title for your presentation. So
that's right.
we'll jump on it in a second. But again, when I look at 8,000 days and think back through how much has happened in my life in the past 8,000
Hmm.
days, and now to say, you know what, when I'm 60 years old, that's how much life to be lived. That sort of brings you to the point like, okay, I've got to take this seriously. I've got to learn and educate myself to help myself and also my clients.
That's right.
So,
Yeah,
um,
and I think that's a good transition to the content potentially, Rosanna. So, you brought up the 8,000 day discussion. And I think many individuals, as they prepare for retirement, right, and you've got that part covered, right. So I think that a lot of recognition in my hat goes off to you and your peers for that layer. Retirement is something that we all look forward to. It's a destiny, it's a goal. But in reality, and what MIT tells us, there's a whole written chapter of our life that needs to be planned for. So when we talk about 8,000 days, and we'll get into that specifically, I think it's really important to talk about the folks at MIT and what they do. So, Rosanna, I think most people look at this slide and they immediately go to the images you see to your right. The folks in the suit and lean on the car. I'll talk about that in a second. But the
mhm,
biggest takeaway from MIT and what the folks do there is, they prepare for life tomorrow. So when you think of sociologists, psychologists, engineers, scientists, right? All of these people come together in one organization to prepare for life tomorrow, right? We know there are challenges and opportunities with living longer. How do you solve those challenges and opportunities? We know that there's behavior as we get older that life change, right? I think I've always heard, I think about my grandmother, and she says that, if you haven't experienced something today, keep living, you will. And
mhm,
that's an opportunity, right? But what you do with that, and then looking at trends in demographics, I think technology gets a lot of attention as it relates to AI. But when you think about the simple things, right, and you think about your car, the backup camera that you see on your car may be a cool feature, but ideally, that's a convenience factor as it relates to aging, right? BMW, which is a big client of the MIT Age Lab, that was born there, right? So the idea of a backup camera, not for luxury, but for safety for the aging consumer, that's where that idea was born. But to the picture, I wanted to spend a little time on that. The individual's wearing this suit. This suit is called Agnes. That Agnes stands for Age Gain Now Empathy System. So a couple cool facts. I've worn the suit. It's not uncomfortable. I think that comes as no surprise to anyone. But if anyone has seen the series on Disney Plus called Limitless, it's got Thor, Chris Hemsworth, or at least the person who played Thor. He actually wears this suit throughout that, or at least in one episode of that series. And what it does, it's
mm,
been calibrated to give someone the experience. Think about someone who's in their mid 70s, unmanaged chronic conditions, who's living alone, right? And so why that's important, you
right.
think about empathy. If you're looking to gain an understanding of the aging consumer, you kind of have to, walk a mile in their shoes, no pun intended there, or pun intended rather. And so this suit can be calibrated to give you that experience of someone who's got issues as they get older. We
Hmm.
know that our vision becomes impaired, right? You see the folks wearing yellow glasses, the tactiles from their helmet down to their waist, right? That limits the mobility of their head and their shoulders, right? It becomes harder to reach things as we get older. So we know we seek empathy to make solutions for those individuals as they get older. The car is really important as well because Rosanna, this is actually a driving simulator, right? You might see these on around the road, at least in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the greater Boston area. But it's gaining data, right? Not for Google's sake, but for information's sake, as it relates to driving on the road as we get older, right? We know that some of you may have had the take the keys conversation with mom or dad or grandma or grandpa. How do you prepare for that, right? Once you
Mhm.
get to that point, sometimes it's too late. But the idea of what MIT does is building the foundation for life tomorrow. So Dr. Joe Coughlin, who Rosanna mentioned earlier, the founder director of the MIT AIDS Lab, he talks briefly about the fact that we've got a longevity paradox. We figured out how to live longer, right, through modern medicine and technology. But what we do with that bonus time, again, that's a question unanswered for many individuals. So what we'll talk about today in segments is what 8,000 days is, why it's important. We'll talk about the four phases of retirement and how we navigate those, and then ultimately at the end, how you actually prepare for your 8,000 day retirement, specifically for yourself. We live life in 8,000 days. So if anyone of your clients, Ruzanna, is kind of thinking about this in a way of most people don't think of life in 8,000 day segments. The idea here is we actually live our life in 22-year segments, right? So 8,000 days breaks down to about 22 years. That first phase,
Gotcha.
which is the learning phase, is pretty much set and forget, right? We know that when we're born, from the time that we go to college, from the time we go to vocational school, military, that's pretty much a set segment of our life, right? There are many avenues that can be taken, but that box is felt relatively clear. That second phase, which is called the growing phase, when you think about once you've graduated, what are some of those milestones that we hit in life, right? You get married, you begin to grow your family, you buy your first and or second home, you're growing your career, you're traveling, you're experiencing life and to the fullest, to a certain degree. But then a transition occurs, right? You know that once
Mhm.
you've built your career, you begin thinking about retirement, right? I'm in that phase at 42. Rosanna, like I see retirement, but I'm not quite there yet. You're maturing, the kids are grown or hopefully getting out the house. You begin thinking about if we have two homes, do we need two homes? Do we downsize? Do we upsize? There are many varied destinations that occur in this maturing phase along with retirement. You might find that that last phase, which is called the exploring phase, is to what Dr. Joe calls is the solo retirement. The picture that you
Mhm.
see here is not by coincidence, but actually you see a female growing throughout her life, and what Dr. Joe says is her life will be very different than their life. Life expectancy for adults has grown, but particularly for women, we know that women will live longer. So her
Right.
retirement will look very different than their retirement. That's something to be planned for along the way.
Yes, that's a great point here that I want to emphasize is her retirement and how I have been thinking in my practice and in my business about this phase in a woman's life. I now emphasize and encourage all my clients to do is have their own financial plan. I strongly believe that every woman needs her own financial plan in addition and in parallel with the family's financial plan, because there are so many aspects that are going to change. The income sources, the being alone. I have a friend who always says, "You will be there to take care of your husband, but nobody may be around to take care of you." And also, what I bring up quite a bit is if you deplete your assets on one retirement, then if you have to take care of somebody in an assisted living or whatnot. So then what does it mean for you? So there are so many aspects of women's lives that are so different from just family or men's financial life. So Frank, thank you for bringing that up, Brian. Um,
Yeah, I mean, and the conversation goes on when you think about the people that have live longer, right? There are ideas that we put out here, I think, to kind of put rubber to road a little bit. Like these are four individuals. You see, that they're actually women, but four
mhm.
remarkable individuals who have exceeded the concept of longevity. So Maria, at 115 years old, as of early 2023, the longest living person
Wow.
in the world. So again, 115, like that is longevity. Jeanne
Right.
Calment at 122 is the longest living person in the world on record. What makes her story unique is she lived through both Spanish flu and the early onset of chickenpox. So she lived a long life, right? World War One and World War Two. So many milestones in the world, but also enjoyed a glass of wine until the day she passed away. So
Nice.
she lived life to the fullest.
Mhm.
Catherine Switzer, you might recognize that name as the first woman to run in the Boston Marathon. While that feat is exceptional within itself, what makes it even more remarkable, she did it again at 75 years old. So,
Wow.
again, like
Mhm.
the outlier of longevity, both from a mental and physical perspective. And my favorite, Julia Hurricane Hawkins, at 107 years old, won the 100-meter dash for the 100 up category. And so again, you think about longevity. it's not just your age, right? I think we've all heard the phrase, right? Age is just a number. But what
Hmm.
you do, right, with all that bonus longevity that you can control, I think is where a lot of opportunities set lies for individuals. So I think it's important to note too, the reality of living longer. Dr. Joe and the folks at MIT Age Lab tell us that a couple that's age 65 years old today has a 50% chance to live to at least 92 years old. And I think this is
Amazing.
remarkable because, you think about the early 1900s, Rosanna, the life expectancy for, any adult was around 50 years old. So we've more than doubled that time span in, give or take 100 years. And so again, we are indeed living longer, right? Again, I think most people think that getting older is something that is a bad thing, but in many cases, it's an opportunity, right? It's something to be planned
Hmm.
for. But then also, too, not just the financial, right? There's a lot of the social element, the living, the transportation, which we'll talk about, that kind of brings to life that concept. So it brings together this mentality. And I look at these images and it always makes me chuckle because any retirement brochure, whether it be travel and even investments for that matter, tend to kind of focus on the warm and fuzzy things of retirement, right? Long walks on the beach, riding
Hmm.
bikes with the hat flying off in the wind and traveling and playing golf every day, all day. In what Dr. Joe and folks at MIT would say is that's definitely a part of the retirement story. It's just woefully incomplete. In
Hmm.
reality, retirement probably looks a little bit more like
Wow.
this, right? You still have the beach and the travel and the golf, but you also think about where you're gonna live, right? You think about your social life in terms of the people that you hang out with, both formally and informally, right? The car, right? How many cars do we need? Who's gonna fix the car? How are we gonna fix the car? Maintenance of the home, kids, grandkids. This list goes on, and I think the reality is all of these different elements. Finances allow you to execute these things, but how you facilitate them and how you enjoy them for as long as you can is where the real opportunity set lies. So, we go through these four phases of retirement, Ruzanna, but, before I get into these, I just want to tell you a quick story, if I could, about kind of retirement and this 8,000 day concept. Tom Brady, which I'm assuming in the Boston area, still carries a lot of weight.
Oh yeah.
So when Tom Brady was born, late set or kind of mid to late 70s, from the time that he was born to the time that he got drafted by the Patriots, which is around year 2000, that's about 8,100 days. From the time that he was drafted by the Patriots to the time that he retired from the Buccaneers, the second time, is around 8,200 days. So I think that's pretty remarkable for two reasons. Number one, the math works out great, so it's a good story to tell. But even more so, the fact that Tom Brady's 45 years old. He was the oldest player at the time, but 45. I mean, he's got another how many years of life left? So he's still very young in the quote unquote retirement phase. So there's many more opportunities when you think about that and what he does with that time. Right? He's got plenty of time and money to be able to do it. But I think the reality is there are many more chapters that he will write within his life.
Hmm.
So with that, I think it's important to think about this. But before we get into the four phases of retirement, any thoughts or questions from your perspective?
Yeah, I think Tom Brady has a great career as a Dunkin' Donuts commercial. Yeah, you bring up a great point because for somebody like Tom Brady, and just as an example of somebody who's been very active and has accomplished quite a bit in their lives, to look at this many years and realizing, wow, is everything behind me, or is there something that I still need to accomplish, and from that perspective him not wanting to retire is so natural. I do want to say that I totally agree with you on this vagueness that we have around retirement. Whenever I speak to clients who are pre-retirees, kind of thinking about retirement and starting to plan for it, the first question is, what is your vision? What do you want to do? And most people will say, well, we want to travel. So that always is the first thing on people's mind. Spend time with family, have more leisure, just do nothing. Maybe that would be one thing if you've had a long career. But other than that, what I like to say is like, well, there 24 hours is a really long time if you don't know how to fill them, right? A lot
Yeah.
of women are happy when their husbands actually get out of the house in retirement because
Right. Right.
it's such a change. So just really thinking through, wow, that's a lot of life, and really just shifting your mindset around. The visioning and the details that you need to think through is amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of the questions that we get from the MIT Age Lab to put that whole retirement concept in the perspective. Sorry, you talked about like what do clients want to do, and it's always the warm and fuzzy stuff, as they should. They've earned the right to kind of have this open-ended, idea of what retirement is. But think about if you do a puzzle, right? So it could even be a puzzle, even Legos for that matter, because my daughter's going through that process now. But what's the first thing you do before you start a puzzle, right? Just kind of think about this intimately. The answer you typically get is start at the edges, you start in the middle, right? You dump the things out of the box. But the first thing you actually do before you start is you look at the box, right? You look at the picture
Mhm.
of the puzzle that you're building, right? So you have a clear image of where you want to be. Now, how you get there, it may be a lot of different roads and avenues to get there, and in terms of your execution to that picture, but you need to know where you're going. So when you think about the four phases of retirement, right, it's not to say that any of these phases are wrong or right, right? Many of these phases have different impacts on our retirement. But when you break these down in segments, right, the honeymoon phase, which I think is the best part from a thought perspective standpoint, right? You know that the ambiguity of work can change. We know that remote work gives us some flexibility. But what retirement is, it's still in our control, right? We get there, we've earned
Mhm.
it, we get our gold watch. But then again, reality may set in a different way when you think about, what, maybe I still have a little bit work to get, right? Maybe I wanted retirement, then I wanted to change my mind. Now, I'm sure the pandemic has given a new light on the retirement process where some people feel that, what, I'm done with the hustle and bustle of the 9 to 5, but I still have equity to give the organization. And oh, by the way, the organization still wants me on board to give that. So when you think about what retirement is, I've heard the phrase Ruzanna, kind of a slow roll into retirement, right? A gray
Mhm.
retirement, right? Pun intended there, where you kind of still work at your own pace. You still provide intellect, you still provide opportunities. You are nurturing the next generation, of leaders within an organization. But more importantly, you still have purpose, right? Your idea of work has changed, but your purpose and your work ethic has not. Ultimately, the reasons why people continue to work, money can play a factor. But the largest factor, again, done by the study, is people want to stay involved, right? They want to be around the people that are like-minded. They want the intellect. They want to continue to think, which is to no surprise if you've done that, right, for 60, or 55 years. So knowing that money is important, it may not be the overall driving factor. For
Mhm.
some folks, though, money is a factor, right? And I think, Razan, I want to bring into the idea of think about a client, and I'm sure you have clients that are like this. The 55-year-old woman, and I'm going to call that number out specifically because she falls into a very unique situation. What's called the club sandwich generation, where she is supporting her potentially adult children, right? Her early adult children,
Mhm.
financially,
Mhm.
emotionally. The list may continue with that, but she's also supporting her adult parents. Okay,
Mhm.
so her adult parents maybe have transitioned into a health facility. Maybe they've moved in with them. There are many different factors, but when you think about why this is important, when we talk about her retirement being very different, the income may play a role, but sometimes her priorities get lost in the shuffle, right? So sometimes her
Right.
focus on her retirement, her savings, right, her investment needs kind of get lost in the shuffle, caring for the people that are important to her. And I think again, this is where we want to bring eyeballs to the idea. Not saying these things should not happen, right? There's nothing we won't do for the people that we care for, but we should make an effort as financial professionals to kind of be acute in our planning process to make sure that no stone is unturned for the people that we're serving. When you think about expectations versus reality, again, many people when they get into the retirement phase, they kind of have to kind of put all their ducks in a row. When you think about Social Security, defined benefit plan, defined contribution plan, all these things we spent time kind of putting money and attention to leading up to retirement, we have to be very clear once we reach that phase what we have in play to help us execute that retirement phase. So the big decision phase, again, did you have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ruzanna.
Yeah, I just want us to stop by there and comment on how true it is, this picture of a 55-year-old, that a woman who has to deal with so many things. And one example that is very personal to me is one of my friends' moms recently had a stroke. So it's not just even taking care of somebody, but dealing with their illness. And then when something like that happens, there could be very important and very heart-wrenching decisions that you need to make. And then you look at the parent situation and say, well, do they have a will? Do they have their like life directives and things like that? um, which brings up the point that I don't know any woman who wants to sort of um, be a burden on her family growing older. So it's not fun when you as a person realize, well, if my mom is in that situation, what about me? What should I do in my situation? And just kind of think about those things. But like you said, we don't have time. There is so much coming at us every day, and it's up to us as financial professionals to actually make a point of guiding our clients, our 55-year-old women clients, to sit down and to really have that empathy for themselves to plan for their lives. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and these all these things happen, So the big decision phase, I think, plays a lot of different roles in the conversation. To your point, when things happen, when those big decisions happens in family, what do you do? When you get that call around mom or dad or aunt or uncle when something happened or whoever you were caring for, how do you kind of enact change? And that kind of leads to those bigger discussions of if something happens, you're going to think about like, should we move closer to our kids? If I have stopped working and I want to get back, like, do I feel guilty for the fact that I've been out of the workforce for 10 years? Like, will people look at me differently? And then also just maintaining relevance, right? It's tough to be social as we get older, but having the courage to get out there and do it, I think again, it pays dividends long down the road. But many of the questions that people ask, this is just a proxy, of some, but the one that I love, proximity to family. And I think this one always
Right.
comes up in many different fashions. But the one example that I would give, which I love this, it's hard to figure out how it works, but I was giving this seminar, and a client came up to me after and said, "Great job, Brian. This really resonates. Here's my story, right? So I've got 4 kids. My wife is deceased. I'm a widow. I decided to move to Dallas, Texas. And I said,
Mhm.
great. It's always bigger in Texas, good weather. And he said, yeah, that's not the reason I moved though. The reason why I moved is I've got a daughter in California, a son in Washington State. I've got 2 kids in New York State. The reason he moved to Dallas, Texas was American Airlines is actually based out of Dallas, Texas, a big hub for the airline. So in addition to the climate, which is another reason, it gave him the most access to his kids around the country. So as opposed to just living
Wow.
close to, several of the kids, what he did was he was central and gave him immediate access. If anyone needed to get to him, they could, right? If you need to get to anyone, you could. So you begin to think about these big decision phases, and you hear examples of like, I get why you did that, right? You want to
Mhm.
be able to be around the people you love, but that could take on different forms. So when you consider that, these big decisions around where I live, most people, and it makes sense, want to stay in my own home. If you ask anyone, and I
Mhm.
love asking this question to a group of investors, who all by raise of hands is looking forward to moving to a nursing home? Crickets, right? No one is looking forward to doing it. It's a reality, right? And that's not to look down on a nursing home, but in many cases, if people have their choice, they would choose to stay in their own home, right? Wherever that own home is. But you think about moving in, upsizing or downsizing, 55 and up community. These are all relevant conversations, but when do the decisions occur, right? It could be when an event happens, or it can also be planned for. And I think these are all opportunities. Again, from a financial professional perspective, we can all be thinking about these because we all deal with it within our own family, one way or another. But we can also help our clients enact that change well before anything happens. To help simplify that conversation, I think MIT gives us three simple questions to kind of get a perspective of kind of where we are in our lives and begin to make that change going forward. So if anyone's curious, I would write these questions down. Right, they're simple enough in concept, but very deep when you begin to peel back the onion, if you will. But the first question, when you think about getting a perspective of what decisions can be made in your life, who will change my light bulbs? Right? Easy enough. When you think about, right, you screw it in, screw it out. When you think about that
Mhm.
broadly, this is more of an aging in place conversation. Who's going to cut the grass? Who's going to clean the gutters? Who's going to go to the grocery store? Who's going to take me to the doctor's office? These are all very simple things that need to be done, but we have to be mindful of who will do it as we age, right? So if being in a 55 and up community helps you with these questions, that's probably where you should begin thinking about, right? If living in your
Mhm.
home is where you want to be, who are the people, whether it could be professionals, it could be friends, family, who are the people going to help you continue to do the things that need to be done in your own home? The next question: how will I get an ice cream cone? Right? It seems kind of tongue in cheek as we kind of exit winter into spring potentially. Ruzanna, you and I were talking before. I was down in South Carolina. Spring is coming. It was kind of warm down there. But the crux of this
Nice.
question is, how will I continue to do the things that I truly enjoy doing? Right? It could be bowling. It could be traveling. It could be enjoying a glass of wine on a Wednesday. Whatever it is, this comes back to transportation, right? So how can I physically get to where I want to do things, but how I do it over and over, right? So again, we think
Mhm.
about as we age, we know that getting in the car and driving when you're 40 is very different than when you're 95. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but there should be examples or parameters in place that help you do that both safely and effectively on an ongoing basis. The last question, I love this one because I think about the social
Mhm.
element of the people that I know, the social butterflies. Who will I have lunch with? My grandmother, God rest her soul, lived to be age 94 years old, and up until 6 months before she passed away, had a very regular lunch schedule. Right, she had what she called
Nice.
her young friends, who were in their 70s. So she was always hanging out with people, always around. But that's important because as we age, that concept of meeting and getting around people becomes a lot more difficult. And I'll paint a little bit of a grim picture, Rosanna. The U.S. Surgeon General just early 2020, as we were in the pandemic, declared an ongoing epidemic, and that epidemic was loneliness.
Oh my
He
gosh.
declared that
Mm.
being lonely was equivalent. The chronic impact of being lonely was equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day.
Wow.
And that
Mhm.
that sinks in when you think about if you've known anyone who's aging and is lonely. These are questions to be answered. We need to get these folks involved out and around people, but we also have to make awareness around this, right? So this is not just for that person. This is for the people around them equally in that process. So when you think about how you navigate the longevity phase, you're in it, you know what you want to do. Now the reality sets in that okay, things need to get done. So the impact of being retired begins to add up. When you look at a perspective from kind of where you were in your early 20s to where you are in your mid 50s, early 60s, or even late 70s, things change, right? So when I was
Mhm.
24, Rosanna, I knew that retirement was about kind of maintaining my health, maintaining my cognitive ability, and getting around, right? That was
Mhm.
my perception of retirement. When you're in it, right? Let's call it someone who's 65 to 74. Health is still an issue, right? You know that chronic illness becomes more of a profound thing in life, but you also think about the financial element. You kind of know what you need, and you need money to do it. But then also you know that cognitive loss is a real thing, right? I think once we
Mhm.
turn 40, our brain shrinks by about 1% per year.
Mm.
So we can maintain our brain health. We just have to be mindful of how to do it. So these all these things are an important part of kind of maximizing longevity phase. But you think about again, the time it takes to do little things and how the issues can compound. Over time, something as simple as buying a new cell phone ain't easy anymore. Something as simple as getting around, the light bulb, making food, healthy food, right? Food that can help us
Mhm.
maintain our health well into retirement. These are all things to think about, right? The problem, and I think the issue, but the opportunity is we have to plan for these things, right? Much like we do with our traditional financial retirement, we have to
Mhm.
maintain the quality of retirement as we go through these phases. When you think about caregiving responsibilities, right? Those who are doing the caregiving, it could be both again the professional and the family. They all need to be involved in these conversations. So this becomes more of just a multi generational conversation. This is what I like to call Ruzanna as an ecosystem conversation. Think about the people you have around you. How do you keep them involved in everything that you do, right? You want some transparency. You want to maintain your privacy to a certain degree as well. I understand that, but the transparency is key because this keeps you both safe, active, and involved. Right? Those are critical things, particularly as we age. Last point that I'll make here: the solo journey. I think you might provide some interesting perspective here, Rosanna. But the idea of living alone is a reality, right? So we begin to revisit those first
Absolutely.
phases. Kind of we get into retirement, we're in it, but then life takes a change. And I think for many cases, we know that, again, she will live longer than he will. Not always the case, but I think the trends point in that direction. So, what does that plan look like? And I'm curious kind of what you think, Rosanna. As you've talked to clients, what are some of the things that you hear? I want to tee you up here. But what are some of the things that you hear from some of your clients that have been issues in that solo retirement phase?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing this up. As you were going through, it just hit me how much planning there is actually to do. And when I look at my own life and just in general, I think most of us will um, probably admit that we don't do nearly enough planning, right? Just life is busy, you're kind of going along, and it's just fast, and you don't always stop to um, like look at your plans and just reflect and journal and just kind of plan out. So living intentionally is one of the things that I am starting to think of much more than I used to, because I now have a little more time. But it's a skill. It's something. It's a habit that we need to always we need to develop over time. So especially when it comes to something like what you mentioned, the retirement. You don't have a habit of planning, and oh, by the way, you don't know what you to plan for, and it just becomes very complex. So I think there is a tendency to just kind of like, forget about it. It's not. I'm not just not going to deal with that. It's just too painful. It's too uncomfortable, too stressful. I see that all the time with money. It's not even retirement. It's just going along in your daily lives. But to a degree, it's not an option, right? If you want to be prepared for that phase of your life. And again, speaking about the solo phase, in my research, I was amazed. It just kind of shocked me that the average age of widowhood is 59. It's not really in the 60s, or it's not even in the 70s. It's 59. So that's quite a bit of years to live through. And as I was going through my research, before we did the master class, I was thinking, what is it? What are some of the conversations that I need to change with my clients? From here is your financial projection. This is how many years you're going to live. This is what your budget is. This is how much you need to save between now and where you're 65. So, what are these aspects of retirement that I need to bring into the conversation? What are the networks that I need to build? What are the professionals around me who will support me to have this complete picture? And that's and what also struck me is it's not a one-time conversation. It's a continuous a conversation that I need to have with my clients, and then my clients need to pay attention to, or encouraged and motivated to pay attention to. And my community that I'm the building, this academy, is stemming from that idea that I need to be regularly bringing up these conversations to my clients, and you need to be regularly tuning in. So, with these conversations and experts that I will be inviting, um, from hopefully I'll have you back for another class. But all these different experts that will be coming in and bringing up these important aspects, so that we make this a habit, and we understand the seriousness of the planning, actually implement what needs to be done to really be prepared, and ultimately enjoy these lives, so that it doesn't become
Right.
like oh my gosh, I can't do this, I can't do that. You want to eliminate the complexities and reduce your limits for so definitely
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
retirement shouldn't be laborious. Retirement shouldn't be something that is extra work, but it does need to be planned for. And I think one of the best examples that I've heard too, much like how economic conditions change. Not my wheelhouse, Ruzanna, so I won't attempt to sound like I'm an economist, but you know, cycles there are cycles in the economy, there are ebbs and flows, but life does the same thing, right? We know that there's not a linear path from retirement to the next phase of retirement, right? It's going to take a lot of twists and turns. But the idea in terms of you being comfortable and then you enjoying it is being prepared for it. And I think ultimately when you think about how you do this, Rosanna mentioned before about, the fact that widowship has increased. We know it's at 59 years old, but also gray divorce. So when we talk about the twists and turns, right? Sometimes it's not necessarily twists and turns together. A lot of folks kind of come to a realization that if I'm going to be living longer, candidly, I want to be happy. So if they're going to facilitate that change, and again, I come back to Tom Brady. Being divorced, he's someone that's got a lot of potential as a bachelor. But he's another great example again that if he were to remain single, right, that's a lot of life lived as a single individual, right? So that planning discussion will be very different, beyond that. As you revisit each phase, right? The honeymoon phase, the big decision phase, and as you navigate the longevity phase, these all build into the solo journey because what happens, Rosanna, people begin to revisit these elements because okay, like much like you do in your life, right? Kind of what worked for me, what didn't work, and what do I want to change? And you kind of build back to these phases because you realize that you can learn from some mistakes, you can build on some opportunities, but you begin to pull in the people that you need to enact that change. One of the things that come out of MIT as well with this conversation is finding a retirement mentor. Finding a
Oh.
retirement
Mhm.
mentor. You think about your own career, and I'll use myself as an example, right? I've got mentors. I've got mentees, people that I'm mentoring as well. I've got sponsors at the corporate level,
Sure.
at the
Mhm.
executive level, and they help me in my career. When I think about retirement, if I had to retire today, I would need someone to show me an example, right? What is it like to kind of find a place to live? What is it like to connect with kids and grandkids? You hear these stories and you begin to kind of build some cows to say that I want to be that way. I want to be like that, right? I want to take that from that person. Maybe not all of that, but you put together all these people in your life that help you execute, but also you help people give you ideas. And I think that's really powerful because ultimately, when you think about how you get through this, we know that social interaction can begin to change and adjust over time. But the people that you have in your life, I think, right, that one point differential in social activity, it corresponds to 5 year difference in motor function, right? So the people that I have around me can help me do the things that I truly want to do. I can still maintain my privacy. It doesn't have to be evasive, but I've got the people that I choose that are in my control that help me enact the things that I want to do both now and going forward. Um, I love this, Rosanna, because I think it kind of brings it all together. When you think about as we go through life, getting older doesn't necessarily have to be something that's an inhibitor. There's a lot of good that happens as we age, not just as we get older. Again, I'm 42 years old, so I've missed the mark on becoming a Nobel Prize winner. I wish I could have done things different, but I think
Don't
I'm happy
shortchange
where I
yourself,
am.
Brian.
But
Everything's possible.
anything's
Very
possible.
good.
You're right.
Yeah.
We'll knock out the COVID years, right? So I gained
Yeah,
2 years back.
exactly.
But at age 69, you think about that's when you kind of are satisfied with life again.
Right.
Incidentally, that's also the time that people begin to think about traditional retirement. But I love the fact that look, at 74, you're happy with your body again. You're happy. You're like
Mm.
you're like you're
Mhm.
like you know what? This is what I got, right? I'm happy with it. I'm enjoying everything that I can. Every day is an opportunity. Every day is a gift. It's a blessing. So it's important to know that, right? That when we retire from our traditional life of work and we transition to our life of me, there are still many milestones to help you embrace that. So the important thing to take away from this is as you prepare for your own retirement, right? We'll kind of close this out. What you're preparing for financially, Ruzanna, other financial professionals, the team that you have around you, right? They've got that, right? You've kind of outsourced that process to them, right? You've got input, you're providing access to what you want to be and where you want to be. But what will you do in retirement? That's a lot on your plate, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think that's an opportunity in that sense that you've got an extra job to prepare for. Much like you prepare for college, much like you prepare for that big interview, for that promotion, much like you prepare for that big trip that you're going to take with your family, right? All these things in retirement take time and preparation. What you do with that, right, if you prepare the right way, ultimately can lead to a very happy and fulfilling retirement. We talk about technology, AI, even robo advisors, right? The automation of reaching these things. The transaction can be helpful, but when you think about the quality, right? I love the idea that even if you get into a Tesla, you still have to make it go. Even if you get into a Tesla, you still have to make it go. So all the automation in the world can be great, but there's still some human element that's going to make it ultimately happy in the process. So when you think about your 8,000 days of retirement, right? So 22 years we live our life in those segments, right? You've got a whole stage waiting to be invented with that solo journey. We know that we have 4 phases of retirement. What they mean for you could vary, right? There's no linear path to each. You'll probably toggle back and forth, but you can break those down very intimately. And then how you prepare for it, sitting down with folks like Ruzanna, so I thank her for her time today, but also within your family. Think about the people that you love, you care about, and that you want in your inner circle, your ecosystem, to help you continue enjoying the things that you truly enjoy both today and going forward.
Wow. This is fantastic. I'm so glad we have this conversation just to kind of put it out there and have it as like, this is it. This is what you need to start thinking about and plan for this important phase of your life that hasn't been seen before. And I love your idea of the retirement mentor. And what I'm super excited about is are all these networks and podcasts and shows that are coming on to help women, not men and women, to see the next phase. In our previous class, we had somebody who has Nicole Christina. She has a Zestful Aging podcast where she talks about all of these issues from women's perspective and what are some of the incredible things that women do in this phase. So that you should be definitely proactive in going out there, looking for resources, making a plan, and slowly but surely executing the plan and and having a team around you to help you do that. Brian, thank you so much. I know we have a workbook that we didn't go through, but we will have
Right.
it available in the resources for the masterclass. I really appreciate it. And then any parting words for us of wisdom, of advice?
I, well, I think I want to thank you. Like that's gonna be my parting word. I want to thank you, Rosanna, for having me. I mean, I'm biased. This is great content. But think about this for the listeners. Think about what your retirement means to you, and be honest with yourself, right? Think about where you want to be. Think about that puzzle, right? Seeing that picture, painting that picture, making it a reality, then putting the pieces together over time to help you execute that picture. And I think you'll live a long quality of life well into retirement phase.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian, so much.
Thank you, Rosanna. I'm looking forward to the next time.